and serves as an advisory brand president for software Zero Trust Initiative leaders for the Cyber Theory Institute and the Cyber Trust Expert Committee member for Cloud Security Alliance. Today, Robert is going to speak on Recalibrate Your Thinking, Overcoming Bias to Build Proactive, Trust-Centered Security Programs. Before I hand it over to Robert, before we welcome him, I want to remind everyone, because you guys have been great with asking questions, one of my audio people will be over here with a mic, and I'll be over here with a mic. So before you ask your questions, let's get it on the microphone so everyone can hear. And we have about 200 virtual people watching as well. So for my virtual attendees, you guys have been doing a really good job of interacting with us. Please make sure you just put your question in the chat box, and we'll make sure that we get your question to Robert. So everyone, with that being said, let's welcome Robert LaMagna-Reiter to the stage.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Let's keep that round of applause going for Kim and the entire team here. They put on a great event, don't they? And this event also wouldn't be possible without all of our sponsors and vendors. So one more round of applause for all of them. We appreciate it. Okay. So today we're going to talk about a topic today which, depending on your view of the word bias, this is probably one of the worst terms I could have used for the presentation, right, with everything going on in the news. But we're going to talk about a perspective today that's not about tech stacks, it's not about threat models, but it's about how we think. Because how we think and convey ideas in information security, it's recognizing biases or framing or lived experiences that shape our decisions. And if we can reorient those towards a model built on proactive trust, that's where we can gain the real velocity, the resilience, and the relevance that we need to pivot all of our security programs for what's going to happen over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So we'll skip that one. Thank you for the introduction, Kim. We'll start here with this weird topic called behavioral economics. I apologize, I didn't bring diplomas in psychology for everybody, but we're gonna do a quick dive into this. Behavioral economics is a field that combines insights from psychology and economics, so think the supply and demand and micro and macro, and brings it into one model that attempts to explain why we all and our businesses diverge from making rational decisions, right? So rather than assuming that we're all going to make logical choices where we maximize self-interest, behavioral economics recognizes that we're people. We sometimes make decisions that go against a model. We sometimes make decisions that are important for us or our families, and those are oftentimes influenced by cognitive biases, emotions, social factors, mental shortcuts. For example, behavioral economics examines why people tend to value immediate rewards over future benefits. That's something called present bias. Why they overreact to potential losses compared to equivalent gains, something called loss aversion, and why we can be influenced by two choices purely on how they are framed to us or structured to us, called the framing effect. Those insights can help us understand real-world behaviors like spending, saving, health, and yes, even information security. So our decisions are less about maximizing value and more about managing perception, managing delivery, managing habit, managing context. And so we'll talk a little bit about these patterns because behavioral economics can help us design better policies, better products, better standard work, better environments that guide our organizations and our teams and people to more beneficial choices, often referred to as nudging. One of the less politically correct ways you can call nudging is probably social engineering, right? But we think of this as positive social engineering. It recognizes that human decision-making is complex and shaped by a mixture of both rational and irrational effects. So traditional security has failed us, but not because we're doing the wrong thing. It's failed us because one of the most persistent issues isn't the lack of talent or tools. It's the fact that we're stuck in defensive mode. We're stuck at this fear of failing as opposed to this first attempt in learning. We're afraid of trying new ideas and concepts at times because we don't want to increase risk exposure or appear that we don't know what we're doing as an expert. We get good at responding to incidents, managing alerts, logging tickets, closing gaps. But are we really getting good at it, or are we just good at creating a queue of work? We struggle to evolve, but that's partially because of how we've all been conditioned to think. It's not one of our faults, all of our faults, right? I think the entire education system and some of the certification programs, they value accuracy and correctness on exams, your schoolwork, instead of embracing that entrepreneurial mindset. We're taught to avoid failure at all costs, and that has actually trickled into information security and has caused us to live in what I call safe thinking paradigms as opposed to explore what's possible. So our strategies are shaped deeply by human biases, as I mentioned. We gravitate towards what we already believe. We double down on past decisions of what worked well, what didn't work well, but we learned how to navigate our way out of because we feel comfortable that we know how to solve that problem. And we resist new paths sometimes because they feel unnecessarily risky. But here's the problem. In complex environments, like information security, clinging to what's familiar often leads us to miss what is essential. So to recalibrate that thinking, we need to recognize those patterns and challenge them. I talked a little bit about the framing bias, and that's the way information is presented. That is the frame, and it influences how we interpret and react to it. In a security sense, frames decisions around loss or fear, like the risk exposure, the attack surface, rather than the gain or enablement that a technology, a delivery team, an operations team, a customer service team, or even the sales team is going to experience as a result of some of the endeavors or new ideas or new ways of thinking that the security team is bringing forward. You can see tremendously positive tone and inflection when it comes to, oh yeah, we're going to reduce the attack surface, we're going to manage, the company's risk exposure to a manageable level. Well, frankly, not many care beyond folks in this room or our teams, but what they do care about is how your paychecks get delivered, and that's revenue, right? So reframing new efforts or projects or maturity according to your framework stack, it's almost like having two different conversations, both within security and outside of security. We then talk about the confirmation bias, and that's the tendency to favor information that supports what I already believe. So since I already believe something, I'm going to likely hear something that's presented from another individual or team. I might either agree with it or not agree with it based on what I feel I already know because I'm an expert, right? Well, it requires us to not discount information that challenges them. One of the ways that we see this in a day-to-day pattern is that a security team, risk team, a GRC team, occasionally will continue double down in investing in a tool, or my favorite thing is doubling down on a process because we believe it's working, or we're getting data that supports the validity of that process being in effect. Even if there's incidents or misaligned worker expectations, or even internal employee data, right, or negative customer experience internally that suggests otherwise. Another good example is that during investigations, our operations engineers might dismiss an indicator that comes up because it looks like the last breach, potential missing other root causes to simplify operations, right? And so confirmation bias leads to us underestimating both emerging threats, relying on legacy systems and processes, blinding sometimes our teams to better approaches or just being open to new approaches. So in information security, we sometimes need to be continuing to keep our eyes open and not being dragged into things like the sunk cost fallacy. Sunk cost fallacy is I'm already $1 million into this project or initiative. I've already spent the money. I might as well continue on this path. That's not entirely the correct option, right? Sometimes we stick around with outdated platforms, workflows, or processes because the legacy investment, despite its poor investment performance, or there are better alternatives that come up. And I'm not talking, again, just tools. Sometimes tools, it's easier to quantify in a dollar sense, but processes and standard work are some of the most underloved, underinvested things that our teams have to deal with. So these cognitive biases are especially dangerous in security because the stakes are high, right? Organizational reputation cost. the net operational expenditures that our teams are inflicting on the organization, and the rapidly changing landscape with everybody drinking the AI Kool-Aid, right? I'm going to continue throwing out the word AI because every time I talk about the word AI, I sound like the teacher in Charlie Brown, right? But it's changing the way decision makers are looking at the macro problem. And so we would have to be open to that as being one of those data points, because decision makers are often under pressure and making decisions with uncertainty. So by recalibrating security thinking, it means we have to start recognizing and picking up on some of these biases. I'm not advocating for us to already double down on our skepticism and just not believe anything you hear, but I'm asking us to think about, hey, you know, they're telling me that in a specific way. Is it driven by a pressure that they're feeling on their team? Is it driven by something being prioritized that I don't have visibility into? Is it being driven because that's an area that they're familiar with and they're not open to talking about other ideas or concepts? It's going to allow you to reframe and recalibrate how you engage and how you further the discussion. You know, most roads that we've experienced often lead to misalignment and frustration, right? It causes us sometimes to have that head exploding at the end of the day that, gosh, you know, why can't they see that we're right? Why can't they see the value in what I'm delivering? Well, if you flip it on its paradigm, they see us as being controls-first thinkers. That, gosh, it's security team. They see me doing something really cool, or me seeing me develop a new process, and the first thing they want to do is give me a list of controls and guardrails that prevent me from moving at scale. Well, when we default to that control-first thinking, we create environments where business users, delivery teams, developers, and business partners start to see security as an obstacle. That can erode trust. And you know what? They route around us. Not because they don't value what we're doing, but they don't understand the why. And when people don't trust us and understand the why, they route around it. And it creates this vicious cycle, this vicious flywheel that we always talk about. Why isn't security invited to the table? Well, it's because we've created such this beast in language and control requirements up front, even during discovery, that we haven't bridged the gap. It's not rooted in a technology problem, it's a trust problem, rooted in how we think, how we frame suggestions, how we tee up expectations and minimum requirements. So if you think about the controls-first culture, which we are all led and bred and taught and grew up, even from the certifications that we all hold, that leads to slower delivery, limited user trust, and reactive programs. And we're trying to get to the opposite, where we have a relationship-first culture, a trust-building culture that leads to faster delivery over time, where up front, as you define how you're going to operate together on working norms and principles, you can execute and iterate over time. So how do we recalibrate? Well, it starts with shifting our orientation. A lot of us sometimes design for threats, but instead of designing for threats, we need to design for trust. We need to design for the things that we know we can control, measure, gauge, and improve upon. Instead of rigid controls, we need to build adaptive guardrails. Instead of waiting for alerts, we need to proactively guide behavior. We need to start figuring out and thinking, how are we going to develop baselines and nudge folks to the acceptable operating ranges that our teams can control in a scalable way? This doesn't mean we abandon risk management. It means we finally need to make it effective by aligning to how our organizations actually work. We're approaching ways where security breaches, the loss of information, even the folks in this room, we're a bit numb to it, right? I mean, you see so many threat feeds that come out day to day, news articles that come out day to day. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I just shut off the news feed when I see that AI wants to kill us because it's learning on its own, right? I can't tell you how many times I shut off my news feed when it says that, yeah, we were able to get AI to recreate the Equifax hack all on its own. Well, that's great. That's not new. Maybe it's being publicized in a new or different way, but adversaries were already doing that. In many organizations, security is still framed as a necessary evil, something that slows down innovation and holds us back. But when we reframe security as why it matters, that it's opening the door to building programs that drive business value. And again, I wish I could give you the easy answer and the solution of what drives business value, but that changes based on your vertical, your organization's annual recurring revenue, your profitability. What drives value in your organization is often tied to how your senior and executive leadership is driving on an annual or every 3-year rotating basis. That's where you need to dive in and align not just with your executive leadership team, but your peers throughout the organization, and making sure you're marching toward the same goal while still delivering within your team's minimum requirements. So trust, we'll go back to trust. It's the foundation of every digital interaction, right? Whether it's me sharing my credit card information over the phone, whether it's a patient opening their medical record on a mobile device, whether it's a developer that sets up automated capabilities to push code every 30 to 60 minutes based on updates. Security really is not about keeping the bad actors out anymore. It's not. It's about creating environments where our users, our partners, and our employees feel safe sharing, building, and engaging with data based on who should have access to that data. And by default, that means that it should be protected from those that shouldn't have access to it. But that's how we need to recalibrate a lot of our models. Customers and partners and regulators do judge your company based on how credible your digital operations are, right? And if you're able to articulate how you're complying with some of those legacy regulations, you become a market signal. Strong identity and access management, for example, that's tailored to your organization, signals, hey, I control who sees what I want to see, when I want to see it, and how. A well-communicated incident response plan, as well as communications when something happens, communicates, we're prepared, we're not panicked, and we're willing to share with you how we're getting better. Privacy-respecting architecture says we value your data and your dignity. It all goes also back to good customer experience. It's not just a clean user interface. It's also the experience. Good security is practically invisible where it works, but it's unmistakable where it fails, right? Fast, seamless logins with single sign-on and passwordless authentication. That's good security as long as it's mapped to the right rules. Intuitive flows for data sharing. That's not just good privacy, it's also good customer experience. And transparent breach communications, as I mentioned, that is fantastic brand marketing and shaping perception, right? One use case that I can share is, there was a healthcare platform that was redesigned their login and account recovery flow to reduce patient lockouts and wait times. That almost sounds opposite, right? I want to make sure that I lock somebody out and I'm not going to let them in until I reset their password, right? But they were able to tighten security regardless of that, because looking at baselines and device trust and heuristics of how you're interacting with an account, the result of that was fewer support tickets and higher satisfaction. So by making it more seamless and relying on data on the back end, you can actually improve greater security outcomes. The lovely attack surface, right? The great thing about this is it allows our job to never be done. You lead with this. This constantly expands. It's never ending. It's kind of like the universe at the Big Bang. It just constantly expands. It gets bigger and bigger. And as a result, we need to buy more products, services, and just ignore processes, right? Because there's so many signals, there's so many events. I'm tired of this. I've been tired of this for a while. This is not what works, and it hasn't worked. The traditional attack surface is infinite, and that's why it continues to be broken. That's why there's I think we were over 4,000 security vendors that I counted last week. And it's unsustainable. When you start shifting your organization's approach to implementing and refining controls to start incorporating protect surface areas influenced by identity and access to information, you can control what truly matters. You can protect what truly matters, and over time, you can begin to ignore the noise of the attack surface. And I know that sounds counterintuitive. That we're doing things, Rob, that I don't find out unless I'm doing attack surface management or constantly scanning my external environment. And my answer to you is, well, if that's the case, find out how it's being introduced without somebody from you or your team being involved. Find out where the communication gaps are. Figure out how to get plugged in aware so that you can begin building controls from the ground up, or visibility processes or trust assurance from the ground up that takes advantage of your data, your applications, assets, and services, and how it should interact over your environment or over through the internet. So designing for credibility. We need to become marketers. We probably should have taken more marketing classes when we were going through some of our degree programs. We need to shift from how do we avoid the headlines, to how do we prove we're an organization worth trusting. So I'm arguing that we need to make our controls externally visible when it matters. Don't just secure sensitive data. Make it clear to both internal and external users how you're protecting it. You can do this by displaying consent or data usage controls, explaining why you're doing passwordless or MFA during onboarding or account enrollment, not just mandate it, maybe make it more user-friendly. And if you're a team that can accommodate it, publish periodic or annual transparency reports or white papers. And people trust what they understand, so keep that in mind with the language. Show them your integrity, not just your policies. Show them that you care about the information, not just that you have a SOC 2. I hope there's no SOC 2 certifiers in here. No? Okay. You also need to align security posture to your brand value, right? And that's where it also gets different by industry and by vertical. The more regulated you are, obviously, your security posture, the less you can communicate a positive security strategy, the more that has the opportunity to impact your brand value. If you market yourself as security and privacy forward, then your architecture and your practices should slowly reflect that. It's the things like building privacy by design into your user flows and your user stories, ensuring default settings reflect minimal data sharing and that you have a process to make those flexible. We already talked about responding to an incident in a way that builds, not erodes trust. Being fast and transparent, and prepare your spokespeople. You know, security is part of your public voice now. If you're not comfortable explaining your actions on the news, or I don't know, what's the modern way of talking about it today? On a Facebook live stream or a TikTok, I don't know, I don't have any of those accounts. But imagine you were defending your actions in light of a negative incident, or just explaining what you do to another in layman's terms. Be prepared to have that voice, that tone, that trust, and that being a coach. Let's also talk about something that security teams often overlooked, but we shouldn't. Who we build with and who we partner with is just as important as what we build. We all know that security can't succeed in isolation, but we need to go a step further. To design security for credibility, we have to stop speaking in threats and controls, or only in threats and controls, maybe keep that internal to our team, but we got to start building joint stories. But the functions that define user experience, operations and delivery, governance and compliance, risk tolerance, brand trust. Let's break this down and give you some examples of how we can reframe this a little bit. So legal. Does everybody enjoy working with their legal team as much as I do? Yes. All of our hands should be up. They're our partners. They're not just our gatekeepers. They help us reframe risk, right? They help keep us out of trouble. Having a good partnership with them helps us understand what those boundaries we can operate in. The data team. Ooh. Well, guess what? The data team, they're my visibility engine. They help me make heads and tails of the information that I'm entrusted to put elastic controls around. Product and engineering. Ooh, who's always gotten along with the product and engineering teams? Everybody, right? Well, product and engineering, they're the ones who actually translate intent into actual user experience. They're one of your biggest advocates for translating how your controls can positively interact with both your internal and external customers. And that's why customer experience is so important. It's not just external. It's just as much external as it is internal. Having a shared vision that security controls, we're not trying to make them excessive. We understand your complaints. Help us build towards a journey, a shared vision map of how we're going to make security seamless. Thinking about security policies and identity proofing and breach notifications. Those shape emotional trust. And the more transparent you are with your legal, your data, and your product and engineering teams, the more they start to go, okay, they're sharing a lot of information. They have a valid point on why they're trying to accomplish what they're trying to do. Let me share what obstacles or what priorities I have if they're not already shared, and we can come together on a working solution. This helps you optimize friction without compromising safety. You start to build feedback loops, right? You want constant feedback to what you're doing and how it resonates and how it works. I have to ask my peers, even today, did what Rob said make sense? Did what my team make sense? If it doesn't make sense, if my message is not being relayed clearly, then that means I'm also failing at my job, and I need to go back and rework how I'm delivering my message. When you come to the table with joint stories, you get stronger buy-in from leadership. I mean, we all want to be able to ask for funding or approval to execute on what's been approved and receive less pushback. That's always a good thing. We want more intuitive controls, self-service, and security by design. That's great, but that doesn't happen over time. It happens through blood, sweat, tears, and painstakingly detailed conversations behind the scenes that result in actionable work. We want a shared definition of trust. One of the funny analogies that I've heard over time, and one of my friends had told me, is that security can sometimes put the word no in innovation, right? We're not the Department of No. We're the department that helps create credible, co-creative task forces that earn trust throughout every interaction. Now, we've talked a lot about moving towards this proactive nature and being more trust-centered, but proactive does not mean predictive, right? Predictive implies certainty. Well, we're never going to have certainty. That's not realistic. It's kind of like security itself, where security, you need to secure the whole thing, right? If you have a field and you build a gate around 98% of it, you're still not secure because you still have an entry point, right? You can never secure the whole system. So just as you cannot secure the whole system, you can't be fully predictive. What we're moving towards is this notion of proactive, which means we're being deliberate on how we're reducing and controlling ambiguity. There's value that we can communicate in how we tune our posture and how we simulate results, how we project both risk tolerance and the effectiveness of controls in terms of simplification. And if we ground that proactive nature in that protect surface where you can control the data, applications, assets, and services on how they interact with your information, you can now build baselines and educate with information to your team members how you're executing. So, to make the shift stick, we need new success metrics. So instead of tracking how many policies are enforced, how many risks did we slap, can we ask, are our team members engaging with security tools? Is sentiment improving? Is trust improving? Are we identifying risky actions and behavior earlier? How is security impacting delivery velocity? Those can help us tell a new story and begin to identify pain points. We cannot measure policy success by whether we deliver training and tell people to go to this link and click on a checkbox and did you read a policy? I'm sorry, it doesn't work. What really matters is, are people following it, and how can I build that baseline within my environment? Can we observe those behaviors in our information environment, the decisions that our folks are interacting with the data on a day-to-day basis, that the policy is articulating and driving user behavior as intended? Is our policy actionable or aspirational? Sure, you can go to ChatGPT, or in my case, I prefer Claude, right? I'm not biased at all, but I prefer Claude. Generate security policies and standards. You can go to SANS, you can download a whole bunch. I would be the first to argue, less than half of those are actionable, enforceable, the way that they're written. You always have to tailor them to your environment to be able to measure that user behavior and interaction. Are our frontline teams and product managers applying policies early? Or are we retrofitting once a year, 2 times a year when we do audits? Did adoption actually improve after we updated our annual security policies and training? It's thinking about how we measure intent and action. Can we trust the people and systems that we depend on? I'm not sure how many of here are actually publishing trust scores on, hey, yeah, I trust that X number of privileged users or users to X, Y, and Z system are interacting with the system as they should. But you know what we do publish? We do publish, hey, on a quarterly basis, I slapped 10 people's wrists because their managers didn't go in and reapprove their access. I mean, you can start to see the different framing effects on what we're trying to achieve. If I have a high degree of certainty, maybe I set my benchmark at 90%. I'm 90% confident that those that have access to X, Y, and Z systems are interacting with those on a baseline that's normal and appropriate over a quarter or half-year basis, however you want to measure that. You have a higher degree in assurance and trust that you have less suspicious behavior ongoing on those systems. I have a higher confidence level that the data that you're gathering together to generate those metrics are more reliable than you just telling me, yeah, Rob, I removed 5 people who shouldn't have had access on this system. Well, great. Well, how long do they have access on that system? You know, do they have access on the system because they were backfilling for somebody who was out on vacation and their roles were missing? Like, there's so many questions that just removing and having those audits occur that are not answered if you just look at the intent and behavior. You start then expanding that out on, are people making the right decisions, navigating risky scenarios like sharing sensitive data with a third party? We talked about third and fourth parties earlier. We had a good conversation earlier on how folks are trying to measure that from the third or fourth party perspective. I'm also equally as curious on how we're measuring how well our employees are sharing sensitive data with a third party internally, right? Are they making good decisions? Are our systems and processes resilient under pressure, or do we have unpredictability? Phishing. God, I love phishing. Actually, I'm probably one of the ones that despises phishing tests the most. I think phishing tests are meaningless, but we can have that conversation a bit later. But resilience over time, not just testing and sending out emails, gauging behavior and clicks, access behaviors, you know, all of those things are areas that we should think about how we're going to gather data, because it's not perfect, but it gets you on the right path. It's those signals that help show us that we're building adaptive security literacy in people and trying to put predictable and proactive safety priorities in our systems. So ecosystem resilience is a big one and often overlooked, right? Security does not exist in a vacuum. We're well aware of that. But the real test is, can our ecosystem take a hit and keep functioning without cascading failures? So here's a good example. Can we detect and contain credential stuffing before it spreads across our customer base? We're going to experience credential stuffing, likely. Can we detect, identify, and contain what's going on before it expands and before that blast radius gets bigger? When something emerges that requires us to follow atypical processes, can we coordinate with the right stakeholders within minutes and hours, not days? It's these types of measures and health gauges that inform us whether we're truly building a system of trust and whether we're on the right direction, and not just building defenses, because building defenses is akin to just buying product and implementing product and expecting it to work, which doesn't happen. So again, this is a good illustration of reactive security. We have processes that have been in place for quite a while, and when an improvement comes along, we never want to embrace it. I'm here to argue that this thing called bias, or our lived experiences, how we've approached and how we were learning in security and how we have trained and formed relationships within our teams if we've been in a place for a while, it creates drag. It creates arguments. It creates different points of view that sometimes we dig our heels in the sand because change is scary, right? Let's admit that change is very scary. If you've been relying on a process for 4 or 5 years and you have metrics that are relied upon, all of a sudden maybe there's some organizational changes. There's new markets your company's expanding to. You got new products and services. Maybe you're onboarding new systems or deprecating legacy technology. All of a sudden, your old indicators and processes don't work. That creates drag on whether you're making the right decision. So here's where we get practical. Instead of designing for what we don't want to happen, we design for what we do want: secure and trusted behavior. That means we use trust as an input. How do you use trust as an input? It's those things that help our users feel confident and safe. It means creating a space for autonomy, built-in safety rails. It means shifting security from just an auditing and controls function to an advisory one, right? So this is taking us beyond the protect surface conversation and working at a technical level with our delivery teams and our engineering teams to more of that of the coach and teacher. We have to have the heart of a teacher, where we guide, enable, and support, not just enforce. I know when you came in here, I said I wasn't going to give you a psychology degree. I'm also not going to give you an education degree. But I am going to challenge all of us to think about how we could coach, mentor, and guide others, because they're likely going to reciprocate for you. Shifting from bias to a data-driven decision-making involves building awareness, implementing structured process and standard work, and then working day in and day out so that over the course of a year or two, you have started to build a better culture that values evidence and data over intuition in the news. So we want to increase awareness of cognitive biases. We want to educate teams. Maybe you don't use the word bias, but maybe you use things like, hey, I've typically led with introducing a fix that is atypical of our normal processes by articulating this. Does that make sense? Does it resonate? Could I be explaining myself better? And by using very simple questions, you're going to get some very actionable feedback. Awareness is the first step in recognizing when a decision that we have made or our teams have made collectively have a hidden bias that we just haven't recognized. And then we want to define clear and objective metrics. Establish specific, measurable, and actionable metrics for performance, risk, or value. It can be a number of things. It can include tracking the number of interesting events or incidents, or our response times, or how well our team executed based on a certain scenario. Setting clear metrics and measuring that baseline consistently over time provides an objective basis for assessing our decisions. We also want to implement data collection capabilities, right, and processes. So equip our teams with knowing what we're after and why we're after that. So for security, it might be great. We can track network activity, but my gosh, how wide is that spectrum? So what do we truly care about? Certain anomalies that are within a standard deviation or two of a normal baseline? Maybe. Do we really want to know how many times people are hitting the external network? Not really. I mean, it's like, what are you actually concerned about? Start defining those. Establishing standardized decision-making processes so that you get data input at each assessment period and reviews and cross-checks and incorporate the correct decision-making. I'm also a big fan of that failure acronym earlier, but instead of failure, I would rephrase it as encourage experimentation or hypothesis testing. So informing judgments, when coming to decisions, encourage teams to test hypotheses, to consider alternative explanations, conduct reviews of past decisions. Those is essentially a postmortem internally, enabling teams to refine your approach over time. And then one of the biggest ones is commit to a culture of continuous transparency, right? Being able to adapt. The biggest superpower that all of you have in here is being able to operate in a period of constant ambiguity, right? That drives a lot of us on a day-to-day basis. The notion that something that I come into today, it's going to be new, I'm going to be challenged, I'm going to learn. We need to make sure that that level of passion, of energy is injected in that continuously training model where you not only go from growth mindset, but you go to an entrepreneurial mindset where you have self-drive and passion. And that's going to cause you to question and seek more data inputs to make your processes more effective. And always look at the big picture. More often than not, you're going to make more improvements by looking at things from a practical and pragmatic standpoint as opposed to being perfect and accurate. You always want to be setting correct problem definitions. You don't have to own the solutioning for all these things. You might have to raise awareness that something needs to be taken care of. Being able to guide and mentor others with the correct problem-solving frameworks is key. And then being able to gauge where on the spectrum of a reactive to a proactive program are you truly right now. We also want to make sure that you keep in mind the obligatory slide from Bruce Schneier. If you've seen me speak before, you probably are like, Rob, you always throw him in there. It's because it's true. Bruce is spot on saying that if you think technology can solve your problems, you don't understand the problems, you don't understand the technology. Technology is the last piece we should be solving. We should always be thinking about the problems from our standard work. You should be thinking from a greenfield perspective nearly every time, right? Even if so a good example for me personally, even after I've just successfully got bought in or buy-in for the current year strategy, I'm actually thinking greenfield again, going, great, I built this next year in place. We've rallied support. Our team is executing at a high level. But that was based on assumptions for year two that everything prior to year one was going to be in place. We're going to make a lot of different decisions over the course of that first year. So now I'm going into the entire rethinking of the decisions that need to be made in years 2 and 3 because the year 1 decisions are going to drastically change. The assumptions are going to change, your variables are going to change, and all of that is rooted in process, and it's going to give you greater clarity and guidance. So, as we come towards the last few slides, we want to talk about how we can overcome some of these barriers. We want to use evidence-based risk frameworks, right? We're very accustomed to using NIST, CIS, ISO. But we want to ground those assessments and frameworks to create a process based on current data, not just aspirational. Don't just apply a framework because you got to apply a framework. Look in there, what's actually required. Implement regular checkpoints and updates, and maintain that culture of flexibility and alignment. So one of the biggest things I've also talked a lot about in the past is this whole notion of zero trust. And I tried to keep that buzzword to a relative minimum, but it's kind of baked into the next few areas because it focuses on how we're only wrapping controls and processes around that what's required. It's not just a bit about evaluating risks and protecting the organization. It's not just focusing on recent high prolific incidents. Building a holistic organization-wide risk profile requires us to look at, yes, what's happened, threat patterns, access trends, and assessments, but we want to see a large macro accurate picture of our security landscape. By taking into account what's going on now, what's happened in the past, and where we think it's going, we can now reframe what we need to do together as a team and the options in a more positive manner. We're not reducing risk by 20%. We're accelerating organizational production delivery by 15%. I'm allowing my organization to expand to all 50 states. It's not that we're enabling the sales team to access 2 or 3 more applications. Tie it back to revenue or productivity. Implement data-driven threat analysis. So what I mean by that is, it's not just, hey, I've got 10 threat intel tools or feeds. It's understanding what those mean, putting a little bit of critical analysis around it. Sure, you can use some summarization tools, but look with real-time insights at actual ongoing risks, as opposed to hearing something in the news and thinking that it's happening to you. A good example is scattered spider, right? We're aware of what scattered spider is, right? I think most of us. We hear in the news that they're targeting industry by industry, but that doesn't mean every single organization is a target. So what I'm trying to articulate is you don't divert all of your resources to just focusing on scattered spider when it's in the news. It's, hey, what's the commonalities of phishing or hammering on my call center to resetting credentials that they shouldn't be doing? How exposed are we? That's something we have coverage for. Just keeping an eye on it and making real-world decisions based on that versus just being siloed and chasing. We already talked about creating those consistent metrics, right? Defining what's most important to your organization. But then taking those metrics, using some scenario-based training and simulations. That approach just helps our teams prepare for the future, right? So do a what-if analysis on some of your baselines and metrics. Well, what if you determine that we have a blip? What does that mean? How did it get there? I've got to applaud my team. They suggested and created, Chris actually, who's here today, she suggested a what would you do scenario topic where we get engagement to our team in a joint Teams channel. Fostering engagement, fostering awareness, getting decision-making and folks engaged in applying their skill sets to scenarios that could actually impact our organization based on what we have. Thinking about what matters, and then communicating that long-term vision, right? Establishing routine, regular check-ins. You shouldn't need to meet with your product teams during sprint planning or quarterly planning. If you're just meeting with your Scrum Masters or you're meeting with product owners or managers for those in an agile environment, once a quarter, then you've lost. You got to be meeting with them on a routine basis. You got to put the effort in up front and have quite a bit of coffee conversations or lunch meetings. So how do we package this all together? You need to start with what I call nudges, small friendly social engineering examples to help get organizational behavior in line. So for example, sending reminders out or teeing those up in a browser, teeing those up in real world communication, teeing those up in your multi-factor prompts that come up, all these different ways that you can meet your employees where there are nudges to help remind folks, hey, good job doing this, or way to go, or just friendly reminders throughout the day versus just 15, 20, 30 minutes of training once a quarter. Nudges that make security easy and rewarding, one-click MFA setup, self-service, things that don't cause our employees to go through 10 different hoops. Framing techniques to shift perception. Again, framing is such a positive area. What if I came up to you and I said, I got a problem I need to solve? There is a 10% risk this is going to take our company down. And it's a CVE 9.9 or 10. Would you act on that? Or would you rather say, hey, there's a 90% chance we're unaffected, we've got the appropriate controls in place, but can I count on you if the information changes and we need to pull certain levers to get action on that? That sounds a lot more approachable and manageable, right? It's the same information, right? 10% chance of being owned, 90% chance of not, but framing it in the chance that, hey, I've evaluated this, I know it's bad, I know the sky's falling, everybody on Reddit is telling us that we got to patch this or we're in trouble, but there's a 90% chance that we're okay. And we have the correct data collection mechanisms in place that if things change, can I count on you? I guarantee you your partners will say yes. Default security settings as a nudge. Implement default security settings where as possible or prevent drift from happening going forward. The default acts act as passive nudges that require no action from users. We also want to anchor to security milestones. So when we articulate health or security posture in the organization, celebrating that we've achieved 95% multi-factor adoption through the organization is huge. It provides a point of reference that teams can rally around. Then you can highlight, well, hey, are you above 95%? Have you hit 100%? Gamify it a little bit, right? This helps maintain focus and progress. You can expand that out. Multi-factor is just an easy one to kind of bang up on. Reduce the bias in your perception through data transparency. So again, people often perceive risks subjectively. Some of you in here lock the doors to your house. We love to use the house analogy in security. Some of you, I hope most of you in here, wear seatbelts, but you also probably speed while you're wearing a seatbelt. So are you really, mitigating the risk or eliminating the risk of a seatbelt by speeding, 20 or 30 miles an hour? We want to make sure that we make that data transparent so that we can show the examples of our trends based on our actions. Share anonymized incident data. Well, I hope there's nobody from legal in here. Hopefully they didn't, just cover their ears. You can share that type of information to show what you're actually getting and how you resolved it. Leverage your loss aversion capabilities to highlight consequences, right? Behavioral economics show that people are more motivated by potential losses than gains. They really are. So highlighting the consequences of poor security, such as the potential impact on personal data or the potential impact to this year's bonus, right? That typically gets people to sometimes rally around, can drive, support. I'm not saying lean on fear, but as you're framing conversations, sometimes you can inject a different twist and take on your language. Your architecture should be simple. Simplify, simplify, simplify. It doesn't need to be that complicated. If it is that complicated, then that just introduces more faults down the line. And I get, in a lot of environments where there's legacy, monolith, or tech debt, that becomes quite complex and it's not done overnight. But the decisions that cascade over time should be made in that effort. And if you get resistance to it, right, where you have folks that are comfortable, that tells you that you have a lot of positive momentum and work to do and start rallying around and finding your partners in battle to make that happen. And again, the feedback loops to reinforce it, this whole flywheel. Gather regular feedback. Do surveys throughout your organization to gauge satisfaction either on small projects or as the team engagement. Positive feedback reinforces secure actions. It also reminds users that we're all in this together and how we're shifting the needle. So to put it all together, communicate differently. Discuss the benefits and facts. Facts are your friends. Fear causes you to start over. We want to make sure that you maintain awareness of your biases. Go out and Google behavioral science, behavioral economics. Look at some of the most common biases. See if you could recognize them in your day-to-day. One of the easiest ones we also always talk about is you have people that are glass half full or glass half empty people. Sometimes that reframes how you look at different scenarios in life. Evangelism and transparency. Always be positive. Destroy your opposition with kindness, perseverance, positive grit. Always be that steadfast. You're going to have to repeat your message 10, 15, or 20 times, and it probably will never stop. And start small and grow. I'm not telling you to go back light a match and burn everything to the ground, right? We don't want to burn the information systems to the ground, but maybe pick a new effort, a new project, a new initiative, something that your organization is embarking on or a transformation. Start there. Start small. Gather some information. Same thing if you're trying to introduce a new methodology for gathering baselining or introducing new delivery mechanisms. Start small, or you're going to bite off too much and fail. So be very scoped. One more thing, my final thought. If there's one idea I hope all of you can carry forward, it's designed for trust, not for control. That's how we move from being reactive firefighting to resilient, relevant, proactive programs. The secret to success is that there is no secret. It's consistency over perfection. It's trust over belief, and it's perseverance over time and dedication. I mean, that right there is the secret to success, and that's what we can all take forward and apply in our unique industry. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to you today over lunch, and I'll be around if there's any questions.
We can take questions now. We have some. We have about 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you for that, Robert. That was excellent. I have heard two speakers today mention SOC 2, which is actually for finance and accounting. There's High Trust, there's CMMC, there's NIST 800-171. Do you have any information about kind of going those directions?
So to make sure I heard the question, there's like a wide variety of external audit certifications.
Frameworks.
Yep. Somebody could choose to bring in an auditor or purchase an automated audit solution. You could generate a certificate of compliance, right? But you could also form your controls internally to conform to. So
right.
Some of the things that come to mind is I believe quite a bit that if a certification is not required to do business with a potential customer, I think it's just a sales tool. I don't think any of those move the needle. They don't actually help us build a trust and resilient and secure program. Now, they can provide good guidance for the questions that you will get, your organization will get from suppliers, partners, the government, state regulators, you name it. But those in by itself don't help your organization actually communicate its level of preparedness or level of security. So I have always approached those, no matter whether it's a SOC 2 Type 2, pick your criteria, or a FedRAMP, audit, whether you're moderate or high, ISO. They're great aspirational targets, and the ones that get the most value out of those tailor each control to their organization and work either with their audit team, or my preferred approach is to bring in like a Drata or a Vanta and do some of that automated control testing where you're not having to bring in somebody all the time. And you want to make sure that as you're applying those, you're measuring and engaging what matters for your organization. That's how you're going to get the most value if you have to go down that path. If you don't have to go down the path of executing a SOC 2 or an ISO certification, I would say if you're looking where to start simple. Start with the Centers for Internet Security Top 18. Start with something simple. Start with NIST Common Security Framework. Start with something very simple, generic, that you can apply and get really good at fewer things, because there's probably only 4 or 5 things that are the root of 90% of the breaches out there, right? So you want to get good at those, unless you have to embark down the path to doing one of those certifications for sales.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions?
And I hope if somebody sells certification services in here, I didn't just make an enemy.
Oh, okay. We have one right here.
I was just hoping you could expand on the phishing testing. You kind of mentioned, you don't like it.
I do not like phishing testing. I kind of give you my, again, this is going to be Rob's opinion. And as you all have heard here today, there's one thing I'm an expert in, and it's my opinion. Phishing testing was phenomenally well intended many years ago when we first started it. We said, hey, there's a problem. And actually, I was talking with Ron earlier today. I said, hey, if there's one problem in the security industry, that if you took somebody from the 90s and you fast forwarded them to today, and you could say, hey, what's one problem that hasn't changed and we still haven't solved? Phishing would be my answer. All we are doing with phishing testing, the vast majority of companies, is sending out sending out emails and attempting to trick our employees. And some companies have disciplinary action. We've had instances where folks have been terminated because they clicked on phishing emails too much, even after taking training. At the same time, you have your HR departments or you have other departments that send out emails that look even worse or even more suspect than a phishing email. So at the same time, you are trying to train your employees, which is great, right? You're trying to educate our employee base, but at the same time, we're causing an influx in our security operations work because people are reporting more false positives, emails are being deleted, HR and marketing are still sending out emails that look the same, and you're creating this feedback loop sometimes now where you're having to allow list or make changes based on company procedures, and you're not getting the intended outcomes. I guarantee you that if you were to continue with your phishing programs, you're still not going to see a drastic reduction in actual click-through rate. So the reason why I dislike them is because if you packaged up some of that effort and some of the lost administrative cost from the effects of phishing training, and you package them into, hey, one of my employees clicking on an email and losing a credential or trying to download something bad, if that owns my organization, then I got bigger problems than phishing training. So that's what draws or drives my perception and what causes me to focus on the proactive and preventative controls. I'm still going to do education. I'm going to shy away, though, from phishing and targeting my employees. That's my perception. That's my opinion. That's kind of I've kind of seen as a general state of the state with phishing testing. Some companies do a great job. Some companies don't use it as a slap on the wrist. They use it as a, hey, you got this. Do you understand why you clicked on it? They walk you through the email. They help you get better at it. They don't use it as a disciplinary tactic. But it doesn't actually change behavior, and that's why I dislike it so much. And it's probably going to make it back to my work. We do. We're on the path to hopefully change it or phase it out. We do. That's one of the things, though, if you're doing it, you can't just shut the switch off. You have to be able to make an intentional change to redirect that effort and that education to other areas. So yes, the organization was doing phishing testing when I came in. We still do it now, but we've had active discussions on how we're going to go to that next evolution where we can shy away from it and do more just-in-time education, behavioral-based training so that we can eventually phase it out. Good question.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, I think the food and the warmth in the room, I think they need a break.
Yeah, all right. Well, thank you very much for attending and staying through, and I look forward to seeing you all throughout the rest of the afternoon.
Yep. All right, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rob.